Recently, during one of our rare hot spells, I watched my grandchildren eating ice lollies. All went well at first, a few drips, but nothing much to worry about. Then the drips increased, and melted ice lolly began to run down the sticks and over their hands. Finally, it passed a tipping point, and what remained of the ice lolly suddenly dropped off the stick, to screams of disappointment. And my mind wandered to exponential growth, glaciers, and the end of the world for the human race. Hi, I'm Dave. This is World of Peace. Thank you for watching our video. Exponential growth? We saw that with COVID. It's where cases, instead of rising by a steady number each day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., it instead doubled each day, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. And that's what I thought I saw when the grandchildren ate their ice lollies. The melt rate speeding up exponentially. So an experiment is in order. Take one set of kitchen scales, one stand, one plastic container, one timer, one ice lolly. Ice lollies straight from the freezer are at about -18 centigrade. Once exposed to warm air, the outside of the lolly starts warming up. After 10 minutes, it's about -10, still frozen solid. After 20 minutes, it's 0, still frozen solid. But only now, after it's warmed up by 18 degrees centigrade, with virtually no melting, does it really start to melt. When it warms now, just another 1 degree, the surface is no longer frozen, and it really begins to melt. The drips finally begin to flow. As it continues warming, the melt gets faster, drips increase into a stream before finally the lolly falls apart. And let's put all that into a graph. As you can see, not a straight line, much more exponential. Starts nice and slow, nice and flat, gets steeper and steeper. Now I'm going to use those melt rates and times to calculate how long the 71 gram lolly should take to totally melt. After 32 minutes, just 5 grams has melted. At that rate, it will take 71 divided by 5 times 32 minutes. That's 454 minutes. That could make sense. After all, nothing melted during the first 28 minutes. But if I now calculated using amounts that melted after 45 minutes, 44 grams, we get 73 minutes, just under 1¼ hours. That's changed an awful lot. In other words, calculating how long it will take to totally melt at different times during the thawing process gives wildly different results. Not at all frightening so far, it's only ice lollies. But my next thought was, what if glaciers also act similarly and melt just a tiny amount for ages, then suddenly accelerate to exponential rate? They are, after all, just like giant lollies. Is it possible? For the last 50 or 100 years, scientists have been measuring glaciers during the equivalent of that initial 32 minutes from our experiment. Not much happening at all, still totally frozen, very little melt, but warming up steadily, with an expecting time for it to melt fully, still decades or centuries away. Are we now entering the equivalent of the 42-minute or the 60-minute phases of our experiment, where the glacier is no longer fully frozen, but is now really starting to melt, and the time left to melt totally plummets down at a frightening rate, down to decades, years, or, most frightening of all, possibly just months? I'm a keen amateur environmentalist, very concerned about global warming and climate change. I have a number of questions because the real experts have me somewhat confused. Not about global warming and climate change being real. They all, even skeptics, agree that the planet is warming and the climate is changing. I'm confused about the timing and the impact on us. Way back in 1985, Carl Sagan began to warn us about climate change and humans destroying the very planet we live on. Back then, he was almost a lone voice. Since then, more and more professional, qualified, experienced scientists have joined in, confirming what he warned us about. A few years later, the International Panel for Climate Change, the IPCC, was formed specifically to investigate this from a neutral standpoint. They all produced reports, explained what was happening. They all predicted that global warming would produce climate change. There was much less agreement about what actually would happen and when it would likely impact mankind. I very recently saw a senior politician, no, I won't name him or her, in the country, produce a snowball in his government's chamber and state that was proof that global warming does not exist. I'm assuming he or she was joking or being deliberately dramatic to make a point. But there are people who experience the most severe winter on record and reach exactly that same conclusion. So I'm going to look here at some definitions to clarify this. Global warming is purely about the rise in the average temperature of our planet as a whole over long periods of time. On its own, a warming or cooling of the planet may or may not be a problem. It's been doing it for millions of years and we're still here. It could even be a good thing. Climate looks at weather over larger areas of land and over longer periods of time. The Sahara is a desert climate. The Siberia has an Arctic climate. All exist on the planet at the same time. And weather refers to very local conditions over very short periods of time. The Sahara Desert can have localised torrential rainstorms, hailstones and flash floods in the winter, still remain a desert climate. Siberia can experience heat waves and remain an Arctic climate. Climate change simply looks at how the climate is changing and how fast as the planet warms up. Again, a change in the climate by itself is neither good nor bad. People in Iceland might welcome a melting of the glaciers, being able to grow grapes. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, the consensus appeared to be that the planet was warming, but it was not a panic. In 100 years, maybe 2100, the end of next century, the increase in global temperature might start to affect the climate, meaning summer temperatures and sea levels would begin to become an issue, and we would be advised to do something about it, preferably sooner rather than later. But no worries, and glaciers are definitely here to stay. By the early 2000s, scientists began to suggest that things were happening rather quicker than their previous models suggested. As equipment advanced, as the computers got more powerful, and as more experts got involved, they were able to make more accurate analyses and predictions. And the consensus was that the climate was changing far faster than previous models suggested. Forget about 2100, we might start noticing those changes in 2075 or possibly even as early as 2050. Over the years since then, newer satellites have been launched that allowed us to much more accurately measure ice thickness at the poles, sea temperature and salinity. Scientists got down into the Antarctic and actually drilled down to the seabed and took totally accurate temperature readings for the very first time ever. And they were far, far warmer than they had predicted. Others ventured into the Arctic and found that permafrost, which had originally been deemed to be no threat before 2100, was actually already pumping methane into the atmosphere at an alarming rate, and it would possibly be all released long before then. And methane is 20 times more dangerous as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Literally year after year, those same scientists kept coming back saying, whoops, the data we used for last prediction was correct, but our new data, using much better equipment, now shows us that things are happening at a much faster pace. Forget 2075, forget 2050, it's going to be much sooner, maybe 2030. Then recently a group of Antarctic scientists using even better equipment found their latest data indicated that the world's largest glacier, Thwaites, could actually collapse and slide into the sea as early as 2025, raising global sea levels by an average of 2 feet almost overnight. That's just 3 years from now. Don't worry though, they said, there are other glaciers that will be with us for hundreds of years to come. Just like my ice lolly experiment, if glacier melt, sea level rises, air temperature, sea salinity, plus all global warming and climate change models are all changing exponentially, it would explain how it's now getting so very much faster. Would certainly explain why scientists keep having to appear on TV and the news saying the last prediction was wrong and things are happening way, way faster than they had predicted. But even if that's not the case and the change is correctly linear, the planet is still warming and the climate is still changing at a scary pace. Looking ahead, you don't need to be a scientist, let alone a climate scientist, to predict what is likely to happen next. I'm not talking about what the climate will do next and when, I've no idea. Neither, it seems, do the experts. No, I'm talking about what the next expert scientist who pops up on TV will say. For nearly every month of every year for the last 4 decades, scientists have stood up one after the other and said, whoops, our predictions are wrong, it's happening faster than our most extreme previous forecast. Then have a guess what the next scientist who stands up on TV is likely to say. Could it be A, wow, panic over, all is well, climate change and global warming have totally stopped, we're no longer at risk, stop worrying? Or could it be B, whoops, our last prediction was wrong, new technology, sensors, computers and data now tells us it's happening far quicker than we thought possible even just a few weeks ago? And what about the next announcement after that, A or B, and the next and the next? I'd be delighted if it's A every time. But if I had to make a bet, I'd put everything I owned on B as the most likely. We'll now project forward because scientists can't keep saying it's getting faster and faster indefinitely. Sooner or later, months, years, even decades from now, the announcement will be, whoops, we've checked all the data from the very latest sensors and computers and we've just discovered it's not actually happening faster. It's already happened. Wow! How could anyone possibly say it's already happened? Surely we'd all have noticed for themselves. It will be so obvious that even non-believers couldn't miss it. Well, you must understand climate change is not a switch. It's more a transition, like a journey, moving gradually from one climate to another over decades, centuries and millennia. Maybe from a nice, cosy, warm, wet, human-friendly one to a blisteringly hot, arid, desert-like, hostile one, or instead maybe to a frozen, icy, lifeless wasteland. Climate change over millions of years has thrown up as many deep freezes as heat waves. Both have existed on Earth in the past, but whatever it has in store, it won't happen overnight. That's where tipping points come in. Going back to winter, imagine driving your car. You're driving carefully as the temperature is very, very cold. And it's slowly dropping lower. Then, unnoticed by you, it slips lower, well below freezing. Not a worry, you're nice and cosy inside, radio's in, no worries. The road now dips slightly downhill, dead straight for over a mile, but downhill all the way. You begin to speed up, so you apply the brakes very gently. To your horror, you find the road has turned to sheet ice and the wheels instantly lock. You continue to speed up, and then when you turn the steering wheel, nothing happens. You continue straight ahead downhill. That's a tipping point you just passed. You haven't crashed. You're still inside, warm, cosily listening to the radio, but you can't stop. You can't steer, and you're speeding towards a busy dual carriageway at the bottom of the hill with traffic whizzing past in both directions 70 miles an hour. There is absolutely nothing you can do at this point. You can't stop, you can't brake anymore, you can't steer anymore. There is absolutely nothing you can do that will make any difference at all. 99.99% certain you are going to crash. Yes, there's a 1 in a million chance the road may be slightly warmer near the bottom and the ice could have melted, allowing you to stop in time. But it's extremely unlikely. Maybe 1 in a million, you reach the bottom, totally out of control, and you cross all 4 lanes of dual carriageway traffic, all doing 70 miles an hour, and not hit a single thing. But you know you're going to crash. That is a classic tipping point. Totally safe at the moment, but whatever is going to happen next will happen. I believe climate change is likely to be the same. We will carry on in our warm, cosy, wet climate, not really noticing that it's changing, writing off anomalies as 1 in 100 year, 1 in 1,000 year events, not really understanding how much it is changing, not wanting to know. And unfortunately, we'll only ever find out how far it's already changed when we find we're going a little bit too fast and we press the brake pedal. All we can do at that time is hope that we haven't yet reached that final tipping point. Not being alarmist, end of the world and all that, I just think the vast majority of people believe that climate change is a really nice, slow, gradual process with years or decades or centuries still to go before it's too late. Most people also believe that the climate will give us a clear and unmistakable sign which says, stop, go no further or you're doomed. They also believe that if we all take action on that day, people and scientists around the world all get together and do exactly the right thing, we'll all be okay and the climate will stop changing. Maybe even go back to the way it was, nice and warm and cosy and wet. I personally believe we got more chance of being bitten by a lettuce. So where are we? Is the majority wrong, living in a dream world? Are we still waiting for the climate to say, stop, go no further? Will billionaires, capitalists, scientists, and the entire population all get together and do exactly the right thing at exactly the right time? And what if we've already gone past that last tipping point and nothing we do now or in the future will have any effect at all on what's going to happen? Only time will tell. Well, thanks for watching. I'd love your comments on this topic. I'm sure they'll be lively. Bear in mind, I've not stated whether or not climate change is man-made. For this video, that fact is totally irrelevant. Hi, I'm Dave. This is World of Peace. If you liked the video, please subscribe so you don't miss future videos.